In this video, I'll show you 6 powerful techniques that are rooted in psychology that can make your real estate photos stand out, become more compelling, and more engaging. So let's start at number 6 and we'll work our way up to the top. The first technique, which lays the foundation for everything else, is known as the 3-second impression rule. It's something that is actually used by Meta for Instagram and Facebook. For instance, there's a 3-second mark on Instagram where if one of your reels doesn't reach that mark, you're probably not going to have your reel promoted into other people's feeds. Same goes for everything else. In fact, many years ago, there was a study that was done by Microsoft, and Meta has also followed up with their own, showing that most user attention span on social media is 2 seconds. Now that doesn't mean that somebody's not going to watch an entire video or look through all of your photos. What that means is that if they can't reach that 3-second mark, pretty much forget about it. So we have to grab everybody's attention within 3 seconds. That means that we have to have something that stands out, that pulls the user in, and that is done by using different techniques of human psychology. And that leads into the next psychological technique known as a high cognitive load, and that has to do with dealing with clutter or uncluttered spaces. As we see clutter, we're not seeing the space. Eventually, the more clutter we see, the more overwhelmed our minds become in a never-ending feedback loop that causes us stress and then a negative bias to what we're looking at. So you might think to yourself that there's very little that you could do when there's clutter at a shoot, but not necessarily. So one, you should always have on your prep checklist something about decluttering. That is so important, and to really stress with your clients, because that's going to help make your pictures more engaging. The other thing you can also do is to offer to your clients the ability to remove that clutter in post, or at least some of that. That's a common add-on that I provide for a number of my clients, especially when it comes to the commercial real estate clients, because as someone's selling a commercial space, they're in the process of moving out, which can take weeks, and things are a train wreck. But even so, when people are selling their homes, they have to put their storage someplace. They think, well, I'll just hide it in this little bedroom over here. Well, you can easily remove that with some of the editing techniques that are available today, especially with some of the AI stuff in Photoshop using generative remove. And that leads up into the next psychological technique, which is known as design simplicity. And this is that less is more idea. Now, this can be even harder to deal with if you're already on site. But here's the goal, is that, for instance, take this room that has a lot of furniture in it. You'll see this a lot, and it's a great entertaining space. But if they could reduce a lot of that furniture, then they reduce a lot of that clutter. So when you have this more simplistic approach to decluttering and also not as much furniture around, making the space look more open, which is great, it'll showcase the space better, but it also reduces that high cognitive load so that people don't get a negative bias from having this overload of trying to process all these various things that are in the space. Now, the next techniques are very important, and they really build off what we've just talked about so far. But before getting to those, I did want to mention that if you're interested in learning more about real estate photography, then I do have some online courses I'd invite you to take a look at. I've got courses that cover professional interior photography, expert editing, exterior photography, videography, business and marketing for real estate photography. And I also have written some best-selling books on real estate photography as well, and I have links to all that down in the description for this video. The next technique is color psychology, and this is overgeneralized that a lot of times we think that a warm space means it's cozy, and that a cool tone to an image means that it's sterile. But those are overarching things. Now, it is very common that if you have something like a fireplace in a room that you want to have more warm tones, and that also if you're doing a twilight shoot, you'll also want more warm than cool tones because that is natural. Also overarching, looking at that from the other end of the perspective, is that if we have cool tones, they do say that it is somewhat sterile, but that also means that it's clean. And that's why it's good to have those type of tones, for instance, in bathrooms and also in kitchens. But the bigger portion of this, it's not the overgeneralization that if you have a certain type of room, you should have this type of warmth. The biggest area of color psychology when it comes to real estate photography isn't the overall color and tone, it's the color cast. For instance, taking a look at this kitchen, it is dominated by warm tones, but it's highly polluted by color casts. We don't necessarily see a lot of that until we go to the image where flash was used, and then we can see a lot more clean colors come out. Now, this wasn't desaturated, it was just the color casts were removed. If we go back to just the ambient shot that then had all the various color casts, we've got a variety of things from, for instance, incandescent bulbs, and that orange glow that comes off of there can just tend to speak that we're now polluting this area with outdated lighting. Also coming in from the outside can be green tones. Like here in this ambient shot, it's just a mess of all kinds of color casts. If you neutralize this and took all the colors out, then it would be lacking. It would just look too sterile. But by using flash, for instance, using the flambient technique, then we can get rid of those color casts and bring in the proper color to the entire space. This then shows that we have a far less impact on any color pollution compared to if we took a look at the ambient shot, which is highly polluted. So instead, by reducing the color casts, we do perceive that this space is cleaner, even though the tones are generally warm, and this isn't necessarily a cool picture with heavy blue tones. And by the way, I also did a recent video that you can watch on color theory as it applies to real estate photography, and I've got a link to that video down in the description for this video as well. The next two techniques of human psychology that affect real estate photos are rooted in what's known as Gestalt psychology. And this is where we seek out certain laws of space. For instance, in symmetry, where symmetrical spaces can trigger a positive emotional response. So according to Gestalt, the law of symmetry in Gestalt psychology is that our mind seeks out order. So this is very important in that, once again, this can reduce that high cognitive load. If we see something that's comfortable with symmetry so that things are evenly spaced around us, then we feel more comfortable in that there is some type of order in the placement of things in our little world. Now, a very common but somewhat overgeneralized view of symmetry in real estate photography is with the single point perspective. We've seen this a lot and it's very common, but it's not the only time where symmetry plays an effect. We can also see it here in this angled dining room, where the subject is centered and it is center weighted. But we can also find it with evenly distributed features at an angle. Like with this space where there are two main features, the fireplace and table, which provide symmetry, by the way, across the rule of thirds, thus placing the center a little more empty, but both sides of the image do have a selling feature. But the rule of thirds does not necessarily equate to symmetry, but we can utilize it in other circumstances, as long as there isn't any empty space. Notice how the kitchen island in this photo is in the rule of thirds, thus offsetting the aisle just to the right. If the aisle was centered, then it would lose its symmetry. So in this case, it's a matter of looking for balance, and that's really the root of Gestalt's law of symmetry, and that's that we try to find balance, we try to find order. But it's just not always possible. These are things that are preferred if you can pull them off. If you can do them, they'll make those photos more engaging, but they don't always work in our favor. And this goes to the next technique of psychology. The next aspect is also Gestalt, and it's the Gestalt law of continuity. We see this in leading lines because we are more likely to see continuous and smooth flowing lines rather than broken or jagged ones. Our preference will be to something that leads to something else because our eyes will naturally follow these lines. This reduces visual clutter, providing a clean path for the viewer. It can also provide a 3D type effect because things in the foreground are leading to smaller things at the vanishing point farther away in the photo. But this doesn't always work in our favor, and there are times when this Gestalt law of continuity can work against us. And we see this once again in single point perspectives that provide symmetry and trigger a positive emotional response. But It's also available, these leading lines, in angled spaces. This then gives a sense of dynamism and movement because we're angled and the vanishing point is farther away. That leads us then into the next space. But when it is angled, you have to be careful of other distracting lines, like in this case, where it would have been better, if space allowed when composing this photo, to compose the couch at a 45-degree leading line in both directions, thus allowing the couch to complement the room's leading lines. Now, you can't always control everything in a space that you've been hired to go photograph. But if you can prep the clients beforehand on simple things like decluttering, give some recommendations also, and more importantly, while you're on site, if you don't find that you can do as good of a job on composing a photo to take advantage of these various elements of psychology, then you can discuss that with your client. It's not that they would change this particular property on that particular shoot to satisfy some of these techniques. But what it does show is that you are a professional, you know how to compose properly, and with a little bit of your guidance, then they can have better staging, they can have better photos in the future, and that makes you stand out above being just another real estate photographer.